On our wedding anniversary, my husband turned to me in front of everyone, looked straight into my eyes and said, "I wish I'd never married you." Something inside me shattered in silence. The next morning I didn't argue or cry. I packed my truth, emptied the accounts, sold the house and disappeared without looking back. "Kennedy, I wish I'd never married you." My husband spoke those words into a microphone at our 5th anniversary party, his voice steady and clear so every guest at the Greenbrier estate could hear him perfectly. The champagne stopped flowing. The jazz band fell silent mid-song. 100 faces turned toward us with expressions ranging from shock to pity to barely concealed satisfaction. I stood there in a champagne silk dress that cost more than I used to make in a month, my carefully applied makeup probably hiding none of my confusion, and tried to understand what was happening. This was not a man having an emotional breakdown. This was theater, performed with precision in front of carefully chosen witnesses. Asher handed the microphone back to the stunned event coordinator and walked off the small stage we had set up for speeches. The crowd parted for him automatically, and he left me standing alone in the wreckage of our marriage. That night I returned to our house and he did not come home. He sent no text, no call, no explanation, just silence. I sat at our kitchen island in the dark and let myself think clearly for the first time in possibly years. People do not destroy their spouses publicly without reason. They do it when they need witnesses, when they are building a narrative for something larger. By morning, my heartbreak had transformed into something colder and more useful. I called my attorney friend Natalie and said 5 words that would start a war Asher never saw coming. "I need to see everything." Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here as we share stories of strength and survival. If you believe that truth and justice matter, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see what happens next. But to understand how I got to that moment, sitting in my kitchen at dawn making a decision that would change everything, I need to go back to the beginning. 6 years earlier, I would never have imagined this life or this ending. I had met Asher Bennett at a charity fundraiser for literacy programs, one of those events where local businesses wrote checks and felt good about themselves for an evening. I had gone reluctantly, dragged there by Emma, my college roommate, who thought I needed to get out more after a difficult breakup that had left me questioning whether I would ever find someone who actually valued what I did for a living. Most men I dated seemed to think teaching was cute but not serious work, something I did until I found a real career or got married and had kids of my own. Asher was different, or so I thought at the time. He was the keynote speaker that night, talking about urban development and community building with a passion that seemed genuine rather than performative. He spoke about how strong communities needed good schools, how education was the foundation of everything else he was trying to build through his real estate work. When he approached me afterward at the reception asking about my work teaching 4th grade, he actually listened to my answers. He did not glance over my shoulder looking for more important people to talk to. He did not check his phone or interrupt me mid-sentence. He looked at me like I was the only person in the room worth talking to, and after years of feeling invisible or dismissed, that attention felt like water in a desert. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. Asher would show up at my apartment after long days at his real estate office with takeout from whatever restaurant he had discovered that week and stories about difficult clients and zoning battles that he made sound almost interesting. I would tell him about my students, about the boy who finally learned to read chapter books after struggling all year, about the girl whose parents were going through a divorce and how I was trying to help her feel safe at school when nothing else in her life felt stable. He said I made him feel grounded, that my work reminded him why his mattered, that watching me care so much about kids who were not even mine made him want to be a better person. When he proposed on a quiet Sunday morning over coffee on my tiny balcony, with no ring yet because he wanted me to pick one I actually liked, I said yes without hesitation. My father had passed away when I was 16 in a car accident that still felt surreal whenever I thought about it, so my uncle walked me down the aisle at my childhood church. It was a small ceremony, just close family and a handful of friends. Nothing like the spectacle our 5th anniversary would become. Asher promised me stability, partnership, and a future built on honesty. I believed every word because he had never given me reason not to. Those first years felt genuine in ways I can barely access now when I try to remember them. We lived in a modest townhouse in Charleston's historic district, close enough to my school that I could walk to work on nice days, saving gas money and getting exercise at the same time. Asher was building his real estate business from almost nothing, working long hours but always making time for Sunday morning coffee on our small porch. We would sit there reading the paper, barely talking, just existing in the same comfortable space. We had simple dinners where we actually talked to each other about our days, our frustrations, our small victories. I remember laughing at his terrible attempts to cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. Remember him helping me grade papers at our kitchen table late into the night. Remember feeling like we were a team working towards something meaningful together. But by our 5th anniversary, everything had changed in ways that happened so gradually I barely noticed until it was too late. Asher's business had exploded beyond anything either of us had anticipated. What started as small residential property flips, buying rundown houses and renovating them for young families, became major commercial developments with investors and partners whose names I recognized from the newspaper. Money poured in like a flood that kept rising, and with it came a lifestyle I had never asked for but found myself accepting piece by piece because refusing felt ungrateful. We moved from our cozy townhouse to a 4-bedroom colonial that Asher insisted we needed for entertaining clients and investors who expected certain things from business partners. The house was beautiful in an intimidating way, with rooms we barely used and furniture that looked expensive but felt uncomfortable, chosen by an interior designer who asked my opinion but clearly already knew what she wanted. I missed our old place more than I admitted to anyone, even Emma. I missed being able to walk to the corner market where the owner knew my name and asked about my students. I missed the neighbors who would wave from their porches and sometimes bring over extra tomatoes from their gardens. I missed the simplicity of a life where I understood my role and felt competent in it. My mother visited often, always commenting on how well Asher had provided for me, how lucky I was to have married such an ambitious man who clearly adored me. She would walk through the house touching things carefully like she was in a museum, telling me my father would have been so proud to see me so well settled. Emma would fly down from Atlanta a few times a year and she would make jokes about how I had married up, but there was always something in her voice I could not quite interpret. Was it envy, concern, judgment? I never asked because I was afraid of the answer, afraid she would confirm what I was starting to suspect, that I had lost myself somewhere in the transition from Kennedy Hartley to Kennedy Bennett. I started feeling like I was playing a role in someone else's life, attending galas in dresses I would never have chosen, smiling for photographs beside people whose names I forgot immediately after being introduced. I made small talk about things I did not care about with people I would never see again, discussing vacation homes and investment strategies and charity boards while internally wondering if anyone else at these events felt as fake as I did. But I told myself this was normal, that this was what marriage evolution looked like, that all couples went through phases of adjustment as their circumstances changed. I told myself I was being selfish for missing our old life when so many people would be grateful for what I had. I taught myself to be grateful, to appreciate the security and stability, to stop complaining even in my own head about feeling disconnected from a life that looked perfect from the outside. The anniversary party was entirely Asher's idea, though he presented it as something we were deciding together. I had suggested something intimate, maybe dinner with our closest friends at our favorite restaurant or a quiet weekend trip to the mountains where we could actually spend time together without performing for anyone. But Asher insisted we needed to celebrate at the Greenbrier Estate, the most exclusive venue in Charleston, with a guest list that kept growing every time we discussed it. 30 people became 50, then 70, then nearly 100 by the time we finalized the invitations. He said it was important for his business reputation, that people in our position were expected to do certain things, to be seen in certain ways. When I pushed back gently, suggesting that our anniversary should be about us rather than his business contacts, he looked hurt and said he wanted to celebrate me, to show everyone how proud he was of our marriage. That shut down my objections effectively because what kind of wife complains about her husband wanting to celebrate their relationship publicly? So I spent weeks helping plan every detail even though event coordinators were handling most of the actual work. The menu required multiple tastings. The flowers needed to complement the venue's architecture. The seating arrangements had to account for complex business relationships I did not fully understand, keeping certain people apart while strategically placing others together. My mother was thrilled, telling everyone in her bridge club about the elegant celebration her daughter was having, finally living the kind of life she had always hoped I would achieve. Emma called it excessive when I told her about the plans, but she agreed to fly in with her new boyfriend, though I could hear the reservation in her voice. The night before the party, I stood in our bedroom trying on the champagne silk dress Asher had insisted I buy from a boutique where I would never normally shop, and for just a moment I felt a wave of disconnection so strong it made me physically dizzy. The woman in the mirror looked like she belonged at the Greenbrier Estate. She looked like someone who attended charity galas and knew which fork to use for each course and never worried about money. She looked successful and settled and exactly where she should be, but I did not recognize her. I could not remember the exact moment when I had stopped being Kennedy Hartley, the fourth-grade teacher who bought her clothes at Target and considered takeout pizza a special treat. When had I become Kennedy Bennett, the real estate developer's wife who owned multiple expensive dresses and worried about seating arrangements and made small talk with people whose lives bore no resemblance to my own? I touched my reflection in the mirror, pressing my palm against the cold glass, and felt nothing. I should have listened to that feeling. I should have trusted the part of me that knew something was fundamentally wrong, but I did not. Instead, I smoothed down the expensive dress, practiced my smile until it looked natural, and prepared to celebrate a marriage I thought was real but was about to discover had been built on lies I never saw coming. The evening had started exactly as planned, which made what came next feel even more surreal. Emma had told stories about our college days that made everyone laugh, reminding the room of when I could barely afford ramen and dreamed of traveling the world on a teacher's salary. Marcus, Asher's business partner, had raised his glass with words about dedication and partnership, about how Asher always credited me with keeping him grounded. My mother had stood with genuine tears in her eyes, talking about how proud my father would have been to see me so happy and settled, so loved by a man who clearly cherished me. I had felt genuinely moved listening to her, thinking maybe I had been wrong to feel disconnected from this life. Maybe this elegant celebration at the Greenbrier estate was exactly where I was supposed to be. Asher had sat beside me throughout all the speeches, his hand resting on mine in what everyone interpreted as affection, his smile perfect and warm for the room full of guests. When he stood to take the microphone, I expected something sweet and predictable. Maybe a joke about how I put up with his long work hours, maybe thanks for being patient with his ambitions, maybe some sentimental story about the moment he knew he wanted to marry me. The room fell silent in that expectant way crowds do when they are waiting for something heartwarming, everyone turning toward us with faces ready to laugh or cry or both. I was smiling up at him, probably looking like the devoted wife in a romantic movie, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Asher looked directly at me with an expression I had never seen before on his face. His blue eyes were cold, calculating, completely empty of any warmth or recognition. For a split second, I genuinely thought something was medically wrong with him. Maybe he was having a stroke or some kind of neurological event that was changing his personality in real time. But his voice was perfectly steady when he spoke, projecting clearly to every corner of the ballroom with the same controlled tone he used for business presentations. "Kennedy," he said, and I remember thinking his tone sounded wrong, like he was addressing a stranger or a business rival rather than his wife. The way he said my name had no affection in it, no history, nothing that acknowledged the 6 years we had spent building a life together. Then came the words that would replay in my mind thousands of times over the coming months. "I wish I'd never married you." They hung in the air like smoke from a gun, visible and poisonous and impossible to take back. My brain simply could not process what my ears had heard. The words did not make sense in this context. At our anniversary party, surrounded by everyone we knew, I actually smiled at first, waiting for the punchline, for him to laugh and say he was joking in some bizarre way I did not understand yet. But he just stood there, microphone in hand, watching me with something that looked disturbingly close to satisfaction, like he was pleased with my confusion. The silence that followed felt suffocating, pressing down on the room like physical weight. I could hear someone's breath catch sharply, a glass being set down too hard, the crystal ringing out, the rustle of expensive fabric as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, not knowing where to look or what to do. The looks on everyone's faces confirmed this was actually happening, that I had not misheard or misunderstood. Emma's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and something else I could not quite identify. Was that pity? Or had she known something was coming? Marcus, who had been smiling warmly just moments before during his own toast, went pale and looked down at his plate like he physically could not bear to watch what was unfolding. My mother's face drained of all color in a way that scared me, her hand clutching her chest as if she was having a physical reaction to the words, as if they had hurt her as much as they hurt me. Asher's father, who had always treated me kindly and welcomed me into their family, closed his eyes and shook his head slowly in what looked like resignation or disappointment. The room fractured into a chaos of reactions. Gasps from different tables, whispers starting immediately as people leaned toward each other. A few people actually stood up as if they were about to intervene somehow but clearly had no idea what intervention would even look like in this situation. The event coordinator stood frozen, microphone extended in her shaking hands, her professional training completely inadequate for whatever this was. And Asher simply handed the microphone back to her without another word, without explanation or apology or acknowledgement of what he had just done. He walked off the small stage we had set up for speeches, and the crowd parted for him automatically, everyone too stunned to move or speak or stop him. He left me standing there alone in the wreckage of our marriage, in front of 100 witnesses who would tell this story for years to come. I did not chase after him, though part of me wanted to demand an explanation right there in front of everyone. But something inside me went very quiet and very cold in that moment, like a switch had been flipped. Some survival instinct took over that I did not know I possessed. I stood up slowly, deliberately, and smoothed my champagne silk dress with hands that were somehow steady despite everything. I turned to face the room full of people who had just witnessed my complete humiliation, all of them staring at me with expressions ranging from horror to pity to what looked disturbingly like entertainment. "I apologize for the disruption," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly calm and clear. "Please enjoy the rest of the evening." It was completely absurd. I was apologizing for my own public destruction, giving people permission to stay and eat the expensive food we had paid for while my marriage imploded in real time. But I could not think of anything else to do or say that would give me back any measure of control over this situation. So I walked through the ballroom with my head up, maintaining whatever dignity I could salvage, past tables of guests who suddenly found their plates fascinating and could not meet my eyes. I walked past the jazz band that had stopped playing mid-song, their instruments hanging silent and useless, past the elaborate flower arrangements that had taken the florist 3 hours to install that afternoon, chosen specifically to complement the venue's architecture, past the dessert table we had spent an hour selecting from the catering menu. Every detail of this party that I had helped plan for weeks now felt like a cruel joke. Emma caught up with me in the marble hallway outside the ballroom, grabbing my arm with enough force to stop me. "Kennedy, what just happened? What did he mean? Did you know he was going to do that?" The questions came rapid fire, her voice edged with something I could not quite identify. Concern certainly, but also something else. I looked at her, at my oldest friend who had flown in from Atlanta for this celebration, and realized I had absolutely no answer to give her. "I don't know," I said, and heard how flat my voice sounded, like I was reporting information rather than discussing my marriage ending. "I have no idea what just happened or why." Emma stared at me like she was trying to determine if I was in shock or lying or about to break down completely. "Do you want me to come home with you? You shouldn't be alone right now." But I did want to be alone. I needed to be alone to think, to process, to figure out what this meant. "I'm fine," I told her, which was obviously a lie but the only thing I could manage to say. "I just need to go home." That night I returned alone to our 4-bedroom colonial in the historic district, and it felt like entering a stranger's home rather than the place I had lived for the past 3 years. Asher had not come back. His car was gone from the driveway when I pulled in. His phone went straight to voicemail when I tried calling, not ringing at all, like he had turned it off deliberately. I walked through rooms we had decorated together, chosen furniture for, hung photographs in, past images of us smiling at various events over the years. Our small wedding at my childhood church, a vacation to Savannah where we had explored historic sites and eaten too much seafood, holiday parties where we posed with friends and family. Every photograph now felt like evidence of a crime I had not known was being committed, like I was looking at staged scenes rather than real moments from our life. I sat at our kitchen island, the same place where we had eaten breakfast just that morning, the same place where Asher had kissed my forehead before leaving for his office, telling me he would see me at the venue, that he was looking forward to celebrating with me. Had he already known then what he was going to do? Had he kissed me goodbye while planning my destruction, while rehearsing those 7 words in his head? I poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle we had opened 2 nights ago, but when I lifted it to my lips I could not make myself drink it. Instead, I just sat there in the dark house, not turning on lights, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows as my mind tried to make sense of what had happened. People do not destroy their spouses publicly without reason. This was not anger or impulse or some kind of emotional breakdown. This was strategy, theater, a performance for a specific audience. Asher had done this deliberately, in front of carefully chosen witnesses, for a purpose I had not yet discovered but knew existed. He was building a narrative, creating a story that would serve some larger plan I could not see yet. By the time the sun started to rise, casting gray light through our kitchen windows, my shock had transformed into something sharper and more useful. Not sadness or heartbreak, though those would come later. What I felt was determination, cold and clear and focused. I needed to understand why this had happened. I needed to see everything I had been missing. The morning after the anniversary, I called Natalie Park before the sun had fully risen. My hand shook slightly as I dialed her number, though whether from exhaustion or adrenaline I could not say. Natalie and I had been friends in college back when she was pre-law and I was studying education, and we had stayed in loose touch over the years. She had gone on to become a divorce attorney in Atlanta. The the kind people hired when their marriages ended badly and they needed someone who would fight without mercy. We saw each other maybe twice a year for lunch when she visited Charleston to see her parents. Casual catch-up sessions where we talked about work and life and avoided anything too heavy. But Natalie had always been sharp, observant, the kind of person who could see through facades and pretense in seconds. I needed that clarity now more than I had ever needed anything. She answered on the second ring despite the early hour. "I heard," she said before I could even speak. "Emma called me last night after the party. He was worried about you. I'm coming over right now." There was no discussion, no asking if I needed her. Just the immediate decision that I would not face this alone. Within an hour, Natalie was at my door carrying her sleek leather portfolio and a bag of bagels from the place near her hotel that she knew I would not eat but had brought anyway because it gave her something to do with her hand. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had sat in darkness just hours before, and I told her everything. Not just about the anniversary toast, though that was where I started. I told her about the past year of our marriage. Details I had not consciously registered as problems until I spoke them aloud and heard how they sounded. The late-night phone calls Asher would take in his office with the door closed, his voice dropping to a murmur I could not quite hear through the walls. The business trips that had increased in frequency and duration over the past 18 months, taking him to cities I had never visited for meetings with people whose names changed every time he mentioned them. The way he had become distant and distracted even when we were in the same room, like his mind was always somewhere else working on problems he never shared with me. I told her about the documents he would occasionally ask me to sign, always explaining them quickly while I was in the middle of something else, making it clear that reading through pages of legal language would be tedious and unnecessary because he had already reviewed everything. Natalie listened without interrupting, taking notes in her precise handwriting, her expression growing increasingly serious with each detail I shared. When I finally ran out of words, she set down her pen and looked at me with an intensity that made me suddenly afraid of what she was about to say. "Kennedy, men like Asher do not blow up marriages publicly unless they are protecting something or building a defense for something worse. That toast last night was strategic. He needed witnesses to see him reject you to establish a narrative he can use later. We need to see your complete financial picture before he has a chance to hide anything or change access to accounts." I spent that entire day becoming a detective in my own life, searching through a house that no longer felt like home. I started in Asher's office, a room I rarely entered because he had always made it clear that this was his private workspace where he handled business matters I did not need to worry about. The filing cabinets were unlocked, which surprised me until I realized he had never expected me to look through them. Why would I? I was the trusting wife who believed everything he told me. I photographed documents with my phone, my hands moving mechanically even as my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. Bank statements for accounts I did not know existed. Investment portfolios with my name listed as co-owner on properties I had never heard of. Business contracts with signatures that looked like mine but that I had no memory of signing. I accessed our shared online accounts, screenshotting everything before passwords could be changed or information could be deleted. Our joint checking account told a story I had been too distracted to notice while living it. Systematic withdrawals over the past 4 months, $5,000 and $10,000 at a time, all labeled as business expenses or investment opportunities. The balance had gone from healthy to nearly empty while I had continued teaching and assuming our finances were stable. I found property deeds for investment real estate titled in my name with addresses in cities I had never visited. When I looked closely at the signatures on these documents, I felt my stomach drop. They looked exactly like my signature, the specific way I formed certain letters, the particular slant of my handwriting. But I had never signed these papers, never even seen them before this moment. Someone had forged my name so perfectly that I almost doubted my own memory. By the third day of searching, I had compiled enough evidence to know that something was very wrong, far worse than a failing marriage or even a simple affair. Natalie brought in David Ramos, a forensic accountant she had worked with on complex divorce cases involving hidden assets. David was a quiet man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see patterns where other people saw only numbers. He set up in my dining room with his laptop and stacks of documents, occasionally asking me questions about specific transactions or property purchases. "Did you authorize this withdrawal? Do you remember signing paperwork for this property? Were you aware your name was listed on this business account?" My answer was always the same. No, I had not known, had not signed, had not authorized any of it. When David finally looked up from his laptop after 2 days of intensive analysis, his expression was grim in a way that made my chest tighten with anxiety. "Mrs. Bennett, your husband has been using your identity to establish shell companies and purchase properties that exist only on paper. These are not real estate investments. The The properties either do not exist or are worthless land purchased at inflated prices. The money flow strongly suggests money laundering. Funds come in from questionable sources, get filtered through these fake property transactions, then disappear into offshore accounts. If this operation comes to light and investigators start looking into it, your name is on everything. You would be the first person they would look at as the responsible party. The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the dining table to steady myself. While I had been teaching fourth graders how to do long division and worrying about lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences, my husband had been building a criminal enterprise using my identity as the foundation. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. David's answer made everything infinitely worse. "Based on the earliest documents I can find with your signature, at least 3 years. Possibly longer if there are accounts or properties I have not uncovered yet." 3 years. Our entire time in this house. Most of our marriage had been built on a lie I had been too naive or too trusting to see. The pieces started fitting together in a way that made me physically ill. I excused myself from the dining room and went to the bathroom, where I leaned over the sink and tried to breathe through the nausea. The anniversary toast was not about ending our marriage because Asher had fallen out of love with me or found someone else, though those might be true as well. It was about establishing a public narrative before whatever criminal operation he was involved in collapsed or came under investigation. By declaring me unstable and unwanted in front of 100 witnesses, Asher was creating the perfect story for when authorities came asking questions. "Look at what she did to our marriage," he could say. "Look at how erratically she behaved. Of course she was capable of financial crimes. Of course she was hiding illegal activities. I had no idea what she was doing behind my back." The unhinged wife who had destroyed their marriage would become the criminal wife who had destroyed her own life. The perfect scapegoat. When I returned to the dining room, Natalie was reviewing David's analysis with a lawyer's eye for detail and strategy. She looked up when I entered and her expression confirmed what I had already figured out. "He's building your unreliability into the public record. When investigators eventually find your name on all these documents and accounts, he will claim you did everything behind his back. He will say he discovered your illegal activities and that is why the marriage fell apart so dramatically. You become the criminal, and he becomes the victim who was deceived by his own wife." I thought about the past 5 years of our marriage through this new and terrible lens. All those business trips where Asher insisted I stay home because the meetings would be boring and I would be more comfortable at our house. All those documents he had asked me to sign while I was distracted, explaining them so quickly I barely had time to read beyond the signature line. All those times he had praised me for being trusting, for not being the kind of suspicious wife who questioned his every move or demanded to see his phone or interrogated him about his schedule. I had thought those comments were compliments, signs of a healthy marriage built on mutual respect. Now I understood they were something else entirely. He had not been praising me. He had been grooming me, training me not to ask questions, shaping me into exactly the kind of wife who would never look closely enough to see what he was really doing. And I had let him, had believed every word, had been so grateful to be trusted that I never questioned whether that trust was being weaponized against me. I made a decision that surprised even Natalie. I was going to disappear before Asher could execute whatever final step he had planned. Not disappear in the sense of running away to some remote location and hiding, but disappear strategically by extracting myself from every financial tie that bound us together before he could trap me further or use those connections to drag me down with whatever was coming. When I told Natalie what I wanted to do, she studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "That is smart. That is exactly what you should do. But we need to move fast and we need to do everything by the book so he cannot claim you are acting illegally or irrationally." Natalie explained my legal rights with the precision of someone who had fought these battles many times before. As co-owner of our house, I had every right to sell it even without Asher's immediate consent since both our names were on the deed. As joint account holder, I was entitled to half of everything in our shared accounts regardless of who had deposited the money originally. As someone whose identity had been stolen and used for criminal purposes, even by my own husband, I had the right to protect myself from further damage. We worked methodically over the next several days, treating my extraction like a military operation that required careful planning and flawless execution. First, I withdrew my legal share from our remaining joint accounts before they could be frozen or emptied by Asher once he realized what I was doing. I went to the bank in person, sat across from a manager who clearly wanted to ask questions about the large withdrawal but was professionally obligated not to, and transferred exactly half of the remaining balance to a new account I had opened at a different bank entirely. It was not nearly as much money as should have been there given what I knew about Asher's business success, which confirmed that he had already moved most of our liquid assets somewhere I could not access them. But what remained was enough to give me options and independence. Then I contacted a real estate agent Natalie trusted, a woman named Patricia who specialized in quick sales and had seen enough divorces to know better than to ask invasive questions. I explained that I needed to sell our house as quickly as possible, that I was co-owner with full legal right to initiate the sale, and that speed mattered more than getting the absolute highest price. Patricia walked through the house making notes and taking photographs while I watched, feeling strangely detached from rooms I had lived in for 3 years. She assured me that properties in our neighborhood were selling within days in the current market, especially houses as well maintained as ours. "I can have this listed by tomorrow morning," she said, "and I would be surprised if we do not have offers by the end of the week." Asher tried to call me twice that week. Both times I watched his name appear on my phone screen and felt absolutely nothing. No urge to answer, no curiosity about what he might say, no lingering affection or hope that he would somehow explain everything in a way that made sense. I let both calls go to voicemail and he left no messages. He sent one text message 3 days after the anniversary party. "We need to talk about the house situation." The phrasing told me everything. Not "we need to talk about us," or "we need to talk about what happened," but specifically about the house situation, which meant he had already been notified that I had listed the property for sale. I blocked his number without responding. Whatever he had to say no longer mattered to me. My mother called daily, increasingly frantic with worry and confusion, asking me to explain what was happening and why people were calling her with questions about my marriage and rumors about the anniversary party. I could not tell her the truth yet. How could I explain that her successful son-in-law, the man she had praised for providing so well for me, was a criminal who had been using me as cover for years? How could I tell her that every document with my forged signature, every illegal property transaction, every dollar laundered through fake real estate deals was designed to make me the scapegoat when everything collapsed? "Mom, I need you to trust me right now," I said during one of these calls, hearing the exhaustion in my own voice. "I cannot explain everything yet, but I promise I am doing what I need to do to protect myself. Please just trust me." She did not understand, but she eventually stopped pushing for answers I could not give. The house sold in 3 days to a cash buyer who asked no questions and wanted to close as quickly as legally possible. I took my half of the proceeds immediately, nearly $200,000 that I transferred to the new account Asher knew nothing about. It was more money than I had ever seen in one place in my entire life, more than I had earned in years of teaching combined. I felt no guilt about taking it. This money represented 5 years of my life, 5 years of being manipulated and used, 5 years of having my identity stolen piece by piece while I remained oblivious. If anything, I was owed far more than half of one house sale. Natalie helped me extract myself systematically from every shared credit card, every joint investment account, every tangled financial thread that connected me to Asher. It felt like performing surgery on my own life, carefully cutting away diseased tissue to save what remained healthy. Each account I closed, each card I canceled, each connection I severed felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself that he had taken. Emma called several times during this period, worried about me and asking if I needed her to fly back down from Atlanta. I put her off with vague reassurances that I was handling things and working with an attorney. Something about her reaction at the anniversary party continued to bother me in ways I could not fully articulate. The pity in her eyes had looked too prepared, too knowing, like she had been expecting something bad to happen rather than being genuinely shocked by it. I filed that observation away for later examination, focusing on the immediate crisis of protecting myself legally and financially. Then I hired Marcus Cole, a private investigator Natalie recommended with unusual enthusiasm. Marcus was ex-FBI, now working private cases after retiring from the bureau, specializing in financial fraud and infidelity investigations. He was expensive, requiring $5,000 upfront before he would even begin working, but Natalie insisted he was worth every penny. "You need to know everything Asher is doing, everyone he is working with and what he is planning next," she explained. "Marcus can find things that would take us months to uncover through legal channels, and we do not have months." I met Marcus at his office downtown, a deliberately unremarkable space with minimal decoration and a wall of filing cabinets that probably contained secrets about half the city. He was in his early 60s with gray hair and the kind of face that people forgot immediately after meeting, which I suspected was exactly how he preferred it. He listened to my entire story without showing much reaction, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad but mostly just watching me with eyes that seemed to catalog and analyze every detail. When I finished, he asked one question. Do you want to know everything even if it hurts? Because I will find things you do not expect and some of them will be painful. Are you prepared for that? I did not hesitate. Everything. I need to know everything. Marcus worked with impressive speed. Within a week, he had surveillance photographs of Asher meeting with a man named Vincent Torres at various locations around Charleston. Restaurants where they sat in back corners speaking in low voices. Construction sites where they walked through unfinished buildings pointing at blueprints. What appeared to be an abandoned warehouse near the port where they met late at night with other men I did not recognize. Marcus provided background research showing that Torres had a questionable history in real estate investment with suspected but unproven ties to organized crime. Multiple properties that existed only on paper. Business deals that left trails of bankruptcies and angry investors. The kind of man that legitimate businesspeople avoided unless they had no choice or were involved in something equally illegitimate. But Marcus found something else, something that cut deeper than the financial crimes and the money laundering and the forged documents. He found evidence of an affair. He showed me photographs of Asher entering a boutique hotel downtown with a woman I recognized immediately, Sienna Caldwell, a junior associate at his development firm. Young, ambitious, beautiful in that polished way that came from expensive salons and personal trainers. Marcus had timestamps showing they had been meeting at this hotel every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for over a year, always checking into the same room under a fake name that Marcus had somehow discovered. More than 50 meetings, a pattern so established it had become routine. He had also recovered text messages through methods he did not fully explain but assured me were legal enough to use if needed. I read them on his laptop screen, sitting in his spare office chair, each message landing like a small, precise knife wound. Once Kennedy is out of the picture, we can finally be together properly, Sienna had written 3 months before our anniversary. She's too trusting to see any of this coming, Asher had replied. By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. I stared at those particular words for a long time. Too trusting. He had said it like it was a character flaw, like my belief in him had been a weakness he exploited rather than a reasonable response to years of careful deception. Marcus watched me carefully, probably trying to gauge whether I was going to break down or fall apart. Are you okay? He asked finally. I surprised myself by laughing, a short bitter sound that did not contain any actual humor. I'm better than okay, I said, hearing how my voice had changed over the past week, becoming harder and colder. I finally understand exactly what I'm dealing with. With Marcus's evidence spread across his desk and David's financial analysis open on my laptop, I started to see the complete picture of Asher's plan with a clarity that was both illuminating and nauseating. He had been using my name and identity to launder money through fake real estate deals with Vincent Torres for at least 3 years, possibly longer if there were transactions we had not yet uncovered. Sienna was not just his mistress, not just the other woman in some conventional affair. She was actively involved in the financial side of their operation, handling paperwork and managing accounts. Her name appearing on internal documents Marcus had obtained through sources he would not identify. The affair and the fraud were intertwined so completely they could not be separated, 2 crimes running parallel and supporting each other. Asher's long-term plan became crystal clear as I studied the timeline we had constructed. When the operation inevitably collapsed or came under investigation, my name would be on all the documents that mattered. The property deeds, the business registrations, the bank accounts, the loan applications. He would claim I had done everything behind his back, that he had discovered my illegal activities and been horrified, that the stress and betrayal had destroyed our marriage. The anniversary toast was his opening move in this strategy, establishing in front of 100 witnesses that I was unstable, that our marriage had ended badly and publicly, that I could not be trusted. Any protest I made afterward would sound exactly like the desperate lies of a guilty person trying to shift blame. It was elegant in its cruelty, a plan that had probably been years in development. I made copies of everything we had gathered, treating each document like it was evidence in a trial that had not yet begun but inevitably would. Multiple copies stored in multiple locations because I had watched enough crime dramas to know that evidence could disappear or be destroyed. One complete set went to Natalie, stored in her office safe alongside other sensitive client materials. Another set I gave to my uncle, my father's younger brother, who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding and who I knew would protect these documents with his life if necessary. He asked no questions when I appeared at his door with a sealed box, just pulled me into a hug and promised that nothing would happen to whatever I was entrusting to him. A third complete set I uploaded to a secure cloud storage account, the kind that required multiple authentication steps and would notify me immediately if anyone tried to access it. I was methodical and careful, treating this like the war at had become. Every document was labeled, dated, cross-referenced with other pieces of evidence. I created spreadsheets tracking money flows, timelines showing when specific crimes had occurred, networks mapping the connections between Asher, Torres, Sienna, and the various shell companies they had established. It was exhausting work that consumed every evening for more than a week, but it also felt empowering in a way I had not experienced in years. I was no longer the passive wife who signed documents without reading them. I was building something that could protect me and potentially bring down the people who had tried to use me as a shield for their crimes. Natalie arranged a consultation with a former federal prosecutor she knew, someone who could tell us whether we had enough evidence to approach authorities or whether we needed to gather more before making any moves. The prosecutor was a woman named Catherine Vale who had left the government to work in private practice, handling white-collar criminal defense for clients who could afford her substantial fees. She agreed to review our evidence as a favor to Natalie, charging nothing for the initial consultation but making clear that if this went further she would need to be retained properly. Catherine spent 3 hours in Natalie's conference room reviewing everything we had compiled. She made notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking questions about specific transactions or requesting clarification about dates and amounts. She examined the forged signatures on documents, comparing them to my actual signature on my driver's license and other legitimate papers. She read through the text messages between Asher and Sienna, her expression remaining professionally neutral even when the content turned explicit or particularly cruel. When she finally looked up, setting down her pen with deliberate care, her expression was serious in a way that made my stomach tighten with anticipation. "This is substantial," she said, and I felt something release in my chest that I had not realized I was holding. "This is federal-level fraud, money laundering, identity theft. If you take this to the FBI, they will investigate. I have no doubt about that. The evidence you have compiled is better than what most agents start with when they open cases." She paused, and I knew there was a qualification coming. "But you need to understand what you are starting. Once you go to federal authorities with this information, there is no going back. Your husband will know you are the source. He may come after you legally, hiring attorneys to claim you are lying or unstable. He may come after you financially, trying to freeze assets or claim you owe him money. And given his connections with Torres, who has documented ties to people who do not solve problems through legal channels, he may come after you in ways that are more directly dangerous." The warning hung in the air between us. Natalie reached over and squeezed my hand, a gesture of support and solidarity. I thought about what Catherine was really asking me. Was I prepared to put myself in the crosshairs? Was I prepared to potentially spend months or years fighting legal battles and watching over my shoulder? The answer came more easily than I expected. "He already destroyed my life," I said quietly. "He stole my identity, forged my signature on criminal documents, had an affair while planning to frame me for his crimes. What more can he do to me that he has not already done? At least if I fight back, I have a chance. If I do nothing, I become exactly what he tried to make me. A victim who was too afraid or too weak to save herself." Catherine nodded like that was the answer she had been hoping to hear. "Then we need to make absolutely certain you are protected before you make any moves. We need documentation showing you were an unwitting victim, not a participant." Over the following days, Natalie helped me draft a detailed timeline of every document I had signed without fully understanding, every transaction that had been done in my name without my knowledge or genuine consent, every way Asher had systematically stolen my identity over the course of our marriage. We included character references from people who knew me well. Emma wrote a statement about my character and trustingness. My principal at the elementary school where I had taught wrote about my integrity and lack of business sophistication. My mother, despite not fully understanding what was happening, wrote about how I had always trusted Asher completely and deferred to his judgment on financial matters. It was humiliating to document my own naivety in such explicit detail, to create a record of how easily I had been deceived and manipulated. Each page felt like an admission of weakness or stupidity, but it was also strangely liberating. Each document I completed was another step toward freedom, another brick in the wall I was building between myself and the man who had tried to destroy me. I was no longer hiding or pretending or making excuses. I was facing exactly what had happened and claiming my right to fight back against it. Meanwhile, Asher had no idea what I was building against him. Marcus continued his surveillance, documenting every meeting with Torres, every afternoon Asher spent with Sienna at their regular hotel, every movement that suggested ongoing criminal activity. The photographs accumulated, creating a visual timeline of crimes in progress. Asher tried to reach me a few more times during this period, emails asking about forwarding addresses for mail that was still arriving at our old house, text messages about shared accounts that needed to be closed or transferred. I responded only through Natalie's office, having her paralegal send cold professional emails that gave him nothing personal to work with and no opening to manipulate me emotionally. Through Marcus, I learned that Asher was busy building his own narrative. He was telling people I had moved out suddenly after the anniversary party, that I was having some kind of breakdown or crisis, that he was worried about me but did not know where I was or how to help me. The story he was constructing painted him as the concerned husband dealing with an unstable wife, reinforcing the narrative he had begun with that public toast. My mother called me in tears one afternoon, saying that people from our old social circle were asking her if I was okay, if I needed professional help, if there was anything they could do. The whispers and rumors were spreading exactly as Asher had intended. "You have to trust me, Mom," I said, hearing the exhaustion in my own voice. "I know this looks bad. I know people are talking and saying things that make me sound crazy or broken, but I promise I am doing exactly what I need to do. I cannot explain everything yet, but I will. Just please trust me a little longer." She did not understand, and I could hear her confusion and worry in every word she spoke. But she eventually stopped pushing for explanations I could not yet give. I spent my evenings in the small apartment I had rented across town, a modest one-bedroom that cost a fraction of what our colonial had. I reviewed documents until my eyes burned, built timelines until the sequence of events was burned into my memory, prepared for the moment when I would finally be ready to strike back. And slowly, methodically, with help from people who believed me and wanted justice, I built a case strong enough to bring down the man who thought he had destroyed me. Catherine Vale made the introduction that would change everything. She called me on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after our initial consultation, and told me she had arranged a meeting with someone I needed to talk to. Special Agent Rachel Morrison from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Catherine explained that Agent Morrison had a reputation for taking down white-collar criminals who thought they were untouchable, people with money and connections and expensive lawyers who had never faced real consequences for anything in their lives. "She is exactly who you need," Catherine said, "but I have to warn you, once you walk into that federal building and present this evidence, you will be setting events in motion that cannot be stopped or controlled. There is no going back from this decision." Catherine arranged the meeting for the following Tuesday, giving me several days to prepare myself mentally and emotionally for what I was about to do. She warned me that the FBI would investigate everything, including me, at least initially. They would need to verify that I was truly an unwitting victim rather than a participant who had gotten cold feet or was trying to avoid consequences. "You need to be prepared for that level of scrutiny," she said. "They will ask hard questions. They will look into every aspect of your life. They will talk to people you know and worked with. Are you ready for that?" I told her I was prepared because I had spent weeks documenting exactly how I had been deceived, building a case for my own innocence that was nearly as thorough as the case I was building against Asher. More than that, I was ready to stop being afraid. For 3 weeks I had been looking over my shoulder, wondering if Asher or Torres would figure out what I was doing, wondering if I should just take my money and disappear somewhere they would never find me. But running felt like letting them win, like confirming that I was exactly the weak and frightened person Asher had always believed me to be. The night before my meeting with Agent Morrison, I sat in my small apartment surrounded by boxes of documents and thought about the past 5 years of my marriage. I had been a good wife in every way I knew how to be, loyal when loyalty was required, trusting when trust was asked for, supportive of Asher's ambitions and career even when they took him away from home for days at a time. And he had weaponized all of it, turning my love into a tool for his crimes, transforming my trust into a shield he could hide behind. I walked into the FBI field office on Tuesday morning carrying a rolling suitcase full of evidence, the kind of suitcase people take on vacation when they plan to be gone for weeks. The security screening at the entrance took longer than usual because of the amount of paper I was carrying, but eventually I was cleared and directed to the 4th floor where Agent Morrison was waiting. She met me in a conference room that was deliberately impersonal, gray walls and a long table and nothing that would distract from the serious business of investigating federal crimes. Agent Morrison was a woman in her late 40s with dark hair pulled back in a practical style and eyes that seemed to see straight through whatever facade people tried to present. She had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had interviewed hundreds of criminals and victims and witnesses and could tell within minutes which category any given person fell into. She gestured for me to sit and I did, setting my suitcase on the floor beside my chair. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, and I noticed she did not use my first name, maintaining professional distance. Catherine Vale has told me generally why you are here, but I would like to hear the story directly from you. Start wherever you think I need to start and take your time. I am not going anywhere. So I told her everything, starting with the anniversary party because that was where my own understanding had begun. I described standing in that ballroom at the Greenbrier estate, hearing my husband tell 100 people he wished he had never married me, watching him walk away without explanation. I told her about the documents I had found in the following days, the forged signatures, the fake properties, the money being laundered through shell companies that existed only on paper. Agent Morrison listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad but mostly just watching me with an intensity that felt like being X-rayed. She was looking for tells, I realized, signs that I was lying or embellishing or leaving out my own involvement in whatever crimes had been committed. When I finished the overview of my story, I opened the suitcase and started laying out documents on the conference table in organized stacks. Bank statements showing systematic drainage of our joint accounts. Property deeds with my forged signature on properties I had never seen or heard of. Text messages between Asher and Sienna discussing their affair and their plans for my destruction. Surveillance photographs of Asher meeting with Vincent Torres at locations around Charleston. David's forensic accounting analysis showing exactly how money had been laundered through fake real estate transactions. Marcus's investigation reports documenting patterns of criminal behavior over multiple years. I had brought them everything Asher had done, packaged and organized and ready for prosecution. Years of fraud laid out in neat piles across a government conference table. Agent Morrison spent 2 hours reviewing just the first layer of evidence, asking occasional questions about specific documents or transactions, requesting clarification about dates and timelines. When she finally looked up from the table covered in paper, her expression had shifted from professional interest to something more serious. Mrs. Bennett, this is substantial. If everything you are showing me checks out, and I have no reason at this point to think it will not, we are looking at multiple federal charges. Organized fraud, money laundering, identity theft, potentially RICO violations given the Torres connection and what appears to be an ongoing criminal enterprise. But then Agent Morrison asked the question I had been dreading since Catherine first arranged this meeting. Why did you not come forward sooner? If these crimes have been happening for 3 years as your evidence suggests, why are you only bringing this information to us now? I had prepared for this question knowing it would come, but actually answering it was harder than I had anticipated. I had to explain that until the anniversary dinner I had not known any of this existed, that I had been a 4th grade teacher focused on lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences, not a business person who understood real estate transactions or money laundering schemes. I walked her through the timeline of my discovery, explaining how the public humiliation had triggered my investigation, how each layer of evidence I uncovered had revealed deeper and more disturbing crimes, how I had gradually realized that Asher was not just ending our marriage but setting me up to take the fall for years of criminal activity. Agent Morrison's skepticism was visible in her expression, the slight narrowing of her eyes that suggested she had heard similar stories from people who turned out to be lying. But as she reviewed the documentation of my ignorance, the character references from people who had known me for years, the testimony from Natalie about exactly when I had first learned about the fraudulent documents, the proof that I had immediately started extracting myself from shared accounts once I understood what was happening, her skepticism gradually shifted into something closer to belief. You could have run, she said finally, setting down the document she had been reading. You could have taken your share of the money from selling the house and disappeared somewhere we would never find you. A lot of people in your position would have done exactly that. Why did you not? I met her eyes steadily, wanting her to see that I meant every word I was about to say. He tried to destroy me. He used my name, my identity, my trust to commit crimes I knew nothing about. He forged my signature on documents that could send me to prison. He planned to let me take the blame for everything while he walked away with his mistress and started a new life built on money he stole. I want him to face consequences for what he did. Real consequences, not just a divorce settlement or some financial penalty he can afford to pay. And I want to make sure that no one else ever becomes collateral damage in his schemes, that no other woman has to sit in a conference room like this one explaining how her husband used her as a shield for his crime. Agent Morrison studied me for a long moment, and I could almost see her making a decision about whether to believe me, whether to commit federal resources to investigating the case I was presenting. Then she asked one more question that would determine everything. Do you know where and when your husband is meeting with Torres next? If we are going to move on this, if we are going to catch them in the act rather than just investigating past crimes, We need current intelligence about their activities. Marcus had provided me with exactly that information. Patterns he had observed over weeks of surveillance suggesting that Asher and Torres met every Friday evening at a waterfront property they claimed to be developing but which was really just another fake real estate deal designed to move money. I gave Agent Morrison the exact address, the time when meetings typically started, everything Marcus had observed about their patterns and habits. She made a call to someone else in the office, spoke in low tones I could not fully hear but which sounded urgent and operational. When she hung up, she turned back to me with an expression that was all business. If we move on this, it happens fast. We will need you to be available for testimony, for additional interviews and questions, possibly for weeks or months of investigation as we build the case. Your life is going to become very public. The media will cover this. People you know will find out everything. Are you prepared for that level of exposure? I thought about the alternative, staying silent and letting Asher win, living with the knowledge that he had gotten away with everything. I am prepared, I said, and felt the truth of those words settle into my bones. Agent Morrison nodded once, then extended her hand across the table. Her grip was firm and solid. Then let us bring him down, she said. The FBI moved with precision I had not anticipated. Agent Morrison's team spent the rest of that week building their case with methodical efficiency, verifying every piece of evidence I had provided, cross-referencing documents with federal databases, obtaining warrants from judges who needed to be convinced that probable cause existed for such a significant operation. I was not involved in most of this work, deliberately kept at a distance so that my presence would not compromise the investigation or give defense attorneys any opening to claim improper procedures. But Marcus kept me updated through Natalie, serving as an information bridge between my civilian world and the federal operation that was quietly gathering momentum. Asher was proceeding with business as usual, completely unaware that his entire operation was about to crumble. He was still meeting with Torres at various locations around Charleston, still spending Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at the boutique hotel with Sienna, still conducting himself with the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. Marcus's surveillance reports showed no change in behavior, no indication that Asher suspected anything was wrong. Why would he? His plan had worked perfectly so far. His unstable wife had disappeared after her public breakdown, exactly as he had predicted to everyone who asked. He was free to continue his criminal enterprise without interference. On Thursday afternoon, Marcus called with urgent news. The meeting was happening tomorrow, Friday evening, exactly as the pattern had predicted. They are moving something big, Marcus said, his voice tight with the kind of excitement that came from seeing a long investigation finally reach its culmination. Multiple vehicles are being arranged. What looks like document transfers based on the equipment being moved into the warehouse. Possibly cash, though I cannot confirm that without getting closer than I should. This is it. This is the culmination of whatever they have been planning. I passed the information to Agent Morrison immediately, calling her direct line and relaying everything Marcus had told me. She listened without interrupting, asked 2 clarifying questions about timing and vehicles, then told me she would call me back. She called back within an hour. We are moving tomorrow. The operation is approved and teams are being briefed tonight. Do you want to observe? The question caught me completely off guard. I had assumed I would learn about Asher's arrest after the fact, maybe get a phone call from Agent Morrison telling me it was done. Is that allowed? I asked, uncertain whether she was making a genuine offer or testing me somehow. It is not typical, she admitted. We do not usually invite civilians to observe active operations. But given that you built this case for us, given what he tried to do to you, I can arrange for you to watch from a safe distance if you want to. You would be in an unmarked vehicle well away from the action, but you would be able to see it happen. The choice is yours. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds before saying yes. I needed to see it. I needed to watch the moment when Asher realized that everything he had built was collapsing, that the wife he had underestimated had been the architect of his destruction. Agent Morrison gave me instructions about where to meet her the following evening, warning me to tell no one where I was going or what I would be doing. Operational security, she said. If word gets out somehow, they might change their plans or not show up at all. Friday evening I sat in an unmarked vehicle 3 blocks from the waterfront property, Agent Morrison in the driver's seat beside me, both of us watching through binoculars as the sun set over Charleston Harbor. The vehicle was deliberately nondescript, a gray sedan that could have belonged to anyone, parked in a location that offered clear sight lines to the warehouse entrance while remaining far enough away to avoid detection. Agent Morrison had a radio earpiece connected to the teams positioned around the property, and I could occasionally hear fragments of communication, codes and call signs that meant nothing to me but clearly conveyed information to the agents involved involved in the operation. Asher's black SUV pulled up to the abandoned warehouse at exactly 7:15, right on schedule. Even from 3 blocks away, watching through binoculars that brought him into sharp focus, I could see his confidence in the way he moved, the casual authority in his posture as he stepped out of his vehicle and looked around the property, the complete lack of concern or caution that came from believing he was protected, that his plan was working perfectly. He thought his stupid trusting wife was somewhere across town dealing with her breakdown, probably crying and confused, while he built his empire on crimes she would eventually be blamed for. Vincent Torres arrived moments later in a black Mercedes that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. He parked beside Asher's SUV and emerged wearing an expensive suit, moving with the kind of controlled grace that suggested he had dealt with dangerous situations many times before. Then came Sienna in her silver sedan, looking nervous even from this distance, glancing around like she sensed something was wrong but could not identify what. She joined Asher and Torres, and the 3 of them stood talking for a moment before heading toward the warehouse entrance. Agent Morrison spoke quietly into her radio, her voice calm and professional despite the tension I could feel radiating from everyone involved in this operation. All units hold position, wait for my signal. We need them inside and engaged in the transaction before we move. I watched Asher enter the warehouse with Torres and Sienna, watched the heavy door close behind them, and for a moment everything was perfectly still. The evening air was cool and clear, sounds carrying across the water from the harbor. Then Agent Morrison said 2 words that changed everything. Execute warrant. Federal agents poured in from every direction with coordinated precision that was almost beautiful to watch. Vehicles that had been parked in seemingly random locations suddenly converged on the warehouse, blocking every exit. SWAT teams in tactical gear emerged from positions I had not even noticed they were occupying, moving toward the building with weapons ready. Unmarked cars sealed off the street in both directions. The entire operation took less than 30 seconds from Morrison's command to complete containment of the property. I watched through the binoculars, my hands shaking slightly, as agents entered the warehouse and the careful plan that had been weeks in development finally executed. They emerged several minutes later, and I watched through the binoculars as Asher was led out in handcuffs. His expression was transforming in real time, confusion giving way to fury, giving way to something that looked disturbingly like fear when he saw the number of agents surrounding him and understood the scale of what was happening. Torres was cuffed beside him, stone-faced and silent, showing no emotion at all, as if this was just an unfortunate business setback rather than the end of his criminal enterprise. Sienna was crying, her perfect makeup running down her face in dark streaks, her hands shaking visibly as a female agent read her rights in a voice too distant for me to hear clearly. They were loaded into separate vehicles, standard procedure to prevent them from coordinating stories or destroying evidence. As the SUV carrying Asher passed near our observation position, I saw his face clearly for just a moment through the window. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, stripped of the confidence and authority that had always surrounded him like armor. No longer the successful real estate developer who commanded rooms full of investors. Just a man in handcuffs facing federal charges that would likely send him to prison for years. Agent Morrison turned to me, studying my face in the dim light of the vehicle's interior. "How do you feel?" she asked. It was the kind of question that probably had a standard answer, some expression of satisfaction or vindication that victims were supposed to feel when their abusers faced consequences. But I surprised myself with my answer, with the truth that came out before I could filter it into something more socially acceptable. Empty. I thought I would feel satisfied or victorious, but I just feel empty. Agent Morrison nodded like she had heard that response many times before, like it was more common than satisfaction. "Justice is not the same as healing," she said quietly. "Justice is just the first step. The hard work comes after." The media coverage started within hours, faster than I had expected. Local news first, breaking into regular programming with urgent graphics and breathless reporters. Then regional coverage as stations across the Southeast picked up the story. By midnight, national outlets were running segments about the Charleston real estate developer arrested in a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Asher's face was everywhere I looked, on television screens in the lobby of my apartment building, in newspapers that appeared on doorsteps the next morning, across social media where people who had never met him shared the story with commentary ranging from shocked to smugly satisfied. The narrative he had tried so carefully to build about me, the unstable wife who had destroyed their marriage through her own erratic behavior, crumbled immediately when details of the federal charges became public. People who had pitied me at the anniversary party started calling and texting, apologizing for believing his lies, asking if I was okay and if there was anything they could do. Emma flew down from Atlanta the day after the arrest, showing up at my apartment with wine and apologies. I should have known something was wrong, she kept saying, sitting on my small couch with tears in her eyes. I should have questioned things more. I should have pushed you to tell me what was really happening. But even Emma had been fooled, had believed Asher's performance of the concerned husband dealing with an unstable wife. Everyone had been fooled. That was Asher's particular talent, making lies look like truth until the very moment they could no longer be sustained. My mother came to my apartment 2 days after the arrest, her face drawn with worry and guilt. She cried while apologizing for not understanding sooner, for pushing me to stay in a marriage that was destroying me from the inside. I thought he was such a good provider, she said through tears. I thought you were so lucky. I told you that so many times. I am so sorry. I held her while she cried, realizing that she had been deceived too, that everyone in my life had been characters in a fiction Asher had carefully constructed and maintained for years. The investigation took 3 months to complete, and during that time I gave testimony, answered questions, and slowly started to reclaim pieces of myself that I had not realized were missing. The legal process consumed enormous amounts of time and emotional energy. There were depositions where defense attorneys tried to poke holes in my story, suggesting I had known more than I claimed or had been complicit in ways I was hiding. There were court appearances where I had to sit in the same room as Asher, separated by tables and lawyers but still close enough to feel his presence like a weight pressing down on my chest. There were constant questions from prosecutors preparing their case, going over the same ground repeatedly to ensure every detail was correct and consistent. Asher was charged with 14 federal counts including fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. Vincent Torres faced even more charges related to his organized crime connections, including racketeering and conspiracy charges that carried mandatory minimum sentences. Sienna cooperated with prosecutors almost immediately, providing additional evidence and testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence and immunity from some of the more serious charges. Her cooperation confirmed details about the operation that I had only been able to piece together from documents and surveillance. She described how Asher had recruited her into the scheme gradually, starting with small tasks that seemed legitimate before slowly revealing the true nature of what they were doing. The legal process was exhausting in ways I had not anticipated, not just the time commitment or the emotional toll of reliving everything repeatedly, but the way it forced me to examine every aspect of my marriage and question every memory I had believed was real. But through it all, I felt increasingly free rather than increasingly burdened. Each day in court was another day Asher saw me standing upright and unbroken, refusing to be the victim he had tried to create. I dressed carefully for each appearance, wearing simple professional clothing that projected competence and stability rather than the expensive designer items I had worn during our marriage. I answered every question clearly and directly, never becoming defensive or emotional even when defense attorneys tried to provoke me into reactions that would make me seem unreliable. Natalie stayed with me through the entire process, attending depositions and court appearances, helping me prepare for testimony, talking me through difficult moments when the weight of everything threatened to overwhelm me. One evening after a particularly brutal deposition where Asher's attorney had spent 3 hours trying to suggest I had been aware of the fraud all along, Natalie and I sat in her office drinking coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. "You know what revenge really is?" she said, looking at me with an intensity that demanded attention. "It is living well. It is becoming someone they cannot touch anymore, someone who exists completely outside the damage they tried to inflict. That is the only revenge that actually matters in the end." I thought about that observation often in the months that followed, letting it reshape how I understood what I was doing and why it mattered. When the verdicts finally came, they were decisive and unambiguous. Asher received 12 years in federal prison without possibility of early parole. Torres received 15 years on multiple counts. Sienna received 5 years and was permanently barred from working in real estate or any financial services capacity. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom where I could observe without being the center of attention. The judge delivered each sentence with clinical precision, explaining the reasoning behind the decisions and the message being sent about the seriousness of these crimes. Asher looked back at me once, just before the marshals led him away to begin serving his sentence. I do not know what he expected to see in my face. Anger perhaps, or tears, or satisfaction, or some combination of emotions that would tell him I was still connected to him emotionally even through hatred. I gave him nothing. I simply looked at him like he was a stranger I was observing with mild curiosity, which is what he had become. The man I married had never actually existed. I had been in love with a performance, a carefully constructed character designed specifically to use me for purposes I never understood until it was almost too late. The real Asher was the one standing in handcuffs, finally facing consequences for choices he had made deliberately and repeatedly over years. After the sentencing, I walked out of that courthouse into bright afternoon sunlight and felt something shift fundamentally inside me. The weight I had been carrying for months, maybe years if I was being honest, began to lift, not disappearing entirely, but becoming manageable in ways it had not been before. I made the decision to leave Charleston entirely within days of the sentencing. There were too many memories in that city, too many places where I would run into people who would always see me as the woman from the anniversary disaster. The story had become local legend, retold at dinner parties and social gatherings as a cautionary tale about trusting too much or a shocking example of how well people could hide their true natures. I chose Portland, Oregon, deliberately selecting a destination as far from South Carolina as I could get while staying in the continental United States. I changed my name back to my maiden name through legal process, becoming Kennedy Hartley again and reclaiming the identity Asher had tried to steal and corrupt. I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where neighbors minded their own business but would help if you needed something. I got a job as a grant writer for a nonprofit organization that helped women escaping dangerous relationships, using my writing skills and my lived experience to help secure funding for programs that provided shelter, legal assistance, and job training. The irony of the work was not lost on me. I spent my days writing proposals that described the challenges faced by women trying to leave abusive situations, the barriers that kept them trapped, the resources they needed to build independent lives. But it felt right in ways I had not expected. Using my experience to help others find freedom gave meaning to what I had survived. My new coworkers knew nothing about my past and I liked it that way. I was not the woman from the viral anniversary video anymore. I was just Kennedy, someone who wrote grants and took walks along the Willamette River and was slowly learning what genuine peace felt like after years of performing a version of happiness I had never actually experienced. Emma visited once, flying out for a long weekend and bringing wine and old photo albums from college. We spent an evening on my small balcony looking at pictures from before Asher, from when I was still figuring out who I wanted to be, and I realized with sharp clarity how much of myself I had lost in that marriage. Not just specific interests or friendships that had faded, but fundamental aspects of my personality that I had suppressed or modified to fit the role of the wife Asher needed me to be. 6 months into my new life, I received a letter from Asher. It had been forwarded through Natalie's office, and I held it for 3 days before opening it, uncertain whether reading his words would set back the progress I had been making toward genuine healing. The letter was short, written in his precise handwriting on prison stationery. He did not apologize for what he had done. He did not take responsibility for the crimes he had committed or the ways he had used and betrayed me. Instead, he wrote about how I had betrayed him by going to the FBI, how I had destroyed his life and his future, how I would never understand the pressure he had been under or the impossible situations he had been trying to navigate. The letter was a masterpiece of deflection and self-pity, taking no ownership and assigning all blame to circumstances and other people. I read it once, sitting at my small kitchen table, and felt nothing except a distant kind of pity for someone so fundamentally unable to see himself clearly. Then I burned it in my kitchen sink, watching the paper curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash that I washed down the drain. That letter was the last piece of Asher I allowed into my life or my thoughts. My mother calls every Sunday now, and we have rebuilt something honest between us after years of performing a relationship that looked good from outside but lacked genuine depth. She apologized for pushing me to be the perfect wife, for caring more about appearances and social standing than about my actual happiness. We talk about smaller things now during our calls: her garden and the tomatoes she is growing, my work and the grant proposal I am struggling to finish, the life I am building piece by piece in a city where no one knows my story. Sometimes she asks if I am happy and I tell her the truth without embellishment. I'm getting there. Happiness is not a destination I reached the day Asher was convicted or the day I moved to Portland or any single moment I can point to and say that is when everything changed. It is something I am building slowly and deliberately in a life that is finally, completely my own. Emma asked me recently during one of our phone conversations if I would ever marry again, if I could trust someone enough after everything that happened. I told her maybe someday, but not because I need someone to complete me or provide stability or give my life meaning. I am already complete. The revenge was never really about destroying Asher or watching him face consequences, though that was necessary and important. The revenge was about refusing to let him destroy me, about becoming someone who could not be touched or diminished by what he had tried to do. And in the end, that is exactly what I did. If this story of justice and resilience kept you captivated until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Kennedy walked into that FBI office with a suitcase full of evidence, taking control of her own story. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories of courage and transformation like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.